Fox News alert, a new year, a new Congress taking power right now. Straight up noon Eastern, the 115th Congress set to convene for the very first time. Republicans say they will make quick work of dismantling 8 years of President Obama's Democratic policies, including his signature health care law. But Democrats say they will fight. This is Outnumbered. I'm Harris Faulkner. Here today, Sandra Smith, co-host of After the Bell on Fox Business, Melissa Francis, Democratic strategist Julie Roginski, and today's hashtag one lucky guy, veteran sports broadcaster and Super Bowl winning quarterback Joe Theismann is here. Outnumbered, we say, and one thing's for sure, always good to have you. Glad you're back. Woo.
Good to be back. Thank you very much.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year, everybody. Merry Christmas. Hope everybody had their dreams come true.
Always.
New Year's, I watched it here in New York City. It was unbelievable this year.
Beautiful.
The weather was so cooperative. The entertainment was unbelievable, and it's exciting to get on to 2017. And in about 3 weeks, it's even, I think, going to be a little bit more exciting.
Well, I feel like I'm in the locker room, and you're giving us the.
We're ready. We're ready. Let's go.
I'm ready to go. Okay, let's get started. On Capitol Hill, lawmakers set to be sworn in, and members expected to re-elect Paul Ryan as Speaker of the House. Once that's done, Republicans, who will be soon in charge of both the White House and Congress for the first time in a decade, say their first order of business will be to repeal and replace Obamacare. Lawmakers will also take a look at overhauling taxes and reversing many Obama-era regulations. And the Senate will start vetting President-elect Donald Trump's cabinet picks, who many Democrats say they plan to target. Chief Congressional Correspondent, our friend Mike Emanuel, joins us from the Hill. Busy guy today. Hey, Mike.
Harris, good afternoon to you. And the festivities are just now getting underway here on Capitol Hill with the 115th Congress being sworn in this afternoon, looking ahead to a packed agenda. In the Senate, Republican Mitch McConnell is due to return as majority leader with a little smaller majority than he had in the last Congress. It'll be 52 Republicans to 48 who caucus with Democrats. A change on the Democrat side with New York's Chuck Schumer taking over as the Senate Democratic leader, replacing the retiring Harry Reid. Over in the House, gaveling in this hour, Paul Ryan is expected to return as Speaker with 241 Republican members. Nancy Pelosi is back as the Democratic leader with 194 House Democrats. Early on, a big focus here will be on repealing the health care law known as Obamacare.
You have to have something that is affordable. You have to have something that actually provides the health care. Is Obamacare 100% broken? I don't think anybody says it's 100% broken.
It's an easy campaign slogan because there's no question that the rollout of the ACA as it occurred was not what was intended. The problem you have is that it's much more complicated when you try to withdraw the benefit.
Many Democrats in this new Congress are trying to figure out where they will be able to work with a newly elected Republican president who is new to elected office. Some say perhaps on reforming, fixing the nation's infrastructure, they may be able to work with him. Other Democrats say they would be with him on the issue of trade and potentially withdrawing from the North American Free Trade Agreement known as NAFTA.
I invite President Trump to Ohio. And I invite him to any state that has lost jobs because of NAFTA. We'd like to help him and his administration to craft a new trade agreement that will result in rising wages and possibilities for people on all sides of borders.
Up early is the election of Speaker. Paul Ryan is expected to win with the support of the president-elect, Mr. Trump. It'll be interesting to see how many Democrats vote for someone other than Nancy Pelosi. Harris?
I'm kind of a nerd. I love days like this where things kick off and it's all the circumstance and pomp and all that kind of stuff. Good to see you, Mike. Thank you. Republicans get set to take aim at Obamacare. Democrats are planning a counter attack to save it. They're encouraging members to share enrollment statistics and to tell stories about Americans saved by the health care law. Today, President-elect Donald Trump tweeted this: "People must remember that Obamacare just doesn't work and it is not affordable." 116% increases. He gives the example of Arizona. Bill Clinton called it, quote, crazy. But House Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi with this warning.
It's the old thing of going into a china shop. You break it, you own it. And they're dealing with something that is very, when I say complex, it's sophisticated in terms of their meticulous attention to the detail of the provision so that they have the impact that they have. They have shown nothing in their ranting and raving that shows any level of knowledge of where they would go or where they would take this.
House Majority Leader Kevin McCarthy countered that earlier on America's Newsroom.
The president said if you liked your health care, you could keep it. You can't. He said premiums would go down. They're up on average over $4,300. Of the 23 co-ops that were created in Obamacare, 18 of them have already failed. Insurance has pulled out of the marketplace. You have more than 1,000 counties that only have one choice. They have no competition. They have no options in those 1,000 counties across America. So if we do nothing, Obamacare collapses on its own. And we can't. We will repeal Obamacare, and we've already reached out on both sides of the aisle across the country to create a health care system that is much different.
Meanwhile, President Obama and Vice President-elect Mike Pence will both be on Capitol Hill tomorrow to talk about health care, each with their own party members. So my first question, Joe, has to do with just the timing of all of this. Months ago, we learned about those double-digit to triple-digit increases. Right. Why didn't Democrats come up with a counter plan then? Because
it wasn't close enough to President-elect Trump being able to take over. I think if you look at the timing from the Democratic Party at this stage with some of the things that President Obama is doing, as well as the Democratic Party, you talk about an easy transition from one president to another. I don't think they're making it easy in any way. And when you think about Obamacare and the effects that it's had, I listened to Nancy Pelosi talk about the China shop and breaking pieces of China. Many pieces of China have been broken. I think what the House is going to try and do right now is try and put the plates back together to a degree. It is a very complex, from what I understand, situation to deal with, but at least somebody's going to move forward, because I know it's affected us in the world of small business. Yeah. We still don't understand totally what the impact it would have. Well, and it's coming through, it's metered out by the IRS. I mean, that's the big, huge agency that oversees it all. So that's complicated, right, Melissa? Also, 20 million people right now are on it. That's complicated. They've got to have a good replacement. Do we have any idea what that looks like?
Without question, they have to have a good replacement. But when she talks about broken China, what's been broken are the promises. I mean, he said premiums would go, I care about numbers. You know, he said they would go down $1,250 a family to $2,500 a family, depending on which quote you looked at year after year every year. That hasn't happened at all in any instance. And people I know who have it, who were thrilled to get it in the first place because they didn't have insurance, now find that no doctor they ever had will take it. But I have to say this, I want them to focus on tax reform. That's my number one issue. Why don't you give all Americans a raise today on day one? Come into the new year with a lower tax rate for everybody. Talk about an instant stimulus. I mean, reform the tax code. That's
well, and they're going to have to, and they're going to have to do something fast, because the stock market has been heavily pricing in that tax cut, and we see it sitting near 20,000. It's hope, but it's anticipation as well. So the bar's been set really high. But going back to Obamacare, you just said something that was really key. When you hear Democratic leadership like Nancy Pelosi saying things like repeal and delay, it doesn't even have alliteration. I mean, she's basically taunting Republicans as we await President-elect Trump to enter office. You're a small business guy. You have been for many years. You've owned many restaurants. You've been in the thick of it. This has caused a lot of uncertainty for millions of Americans and many small businesses across this country. What do they need to hear, the Republicans, as they get together? What do they need to hear from people like you? They need to figure out a solution.
Well, they need to come up with a plan. Certainly, we understand that people need to be insured. That's a given. What we need to be able to see in the world of business is an affordable program that we can implement that involves our people that work for us, our associates. I don't like to call them employees, our associates and our partners in the business. Make something affordable. Make something that we can understand. We still haven't seen the final repercussions. We see a lot of insurance companies pulling out. Give people an option and an opportunity to be able to keep their doctors, to be able to get health care, to be able to take care of their families, to be able to get the young involved. That's one of the biggest things. Young people out there are saying, hey, look, I'm going to be around a while. I'm not going to finance something for the older people on the program. Right. I'm not going to do it. Plus, they had a fine system set up in such a way that if you didn't take Obamacare, it would cost you more money to take the program than it would to be fined. Yeah. Well, that doesn't make any sense. There's no incentive out there to be able to get involved in the program.
Well, and what Melissa was talking about was that idea of kind of the bronze level of Obamacare. If you've never had it and that is your option, nobody will take it that you want to go to a doctor to. But Julie, I want to talk to you about just where we are with Democrats. And you heard me ask before, this was previous to the election that we knew about these increases. So now you see President Obama going to the Hill and caucusing with Democrats, trying to come up with what exactly?
Well, I suspect to preserve his legacy on Obamacare first and foremost. But look,
are they going to offer up their own plan?
The Democrats had their plan. The Democrats passed their plan with no Republican votes. It is now up to the Republicans to figure out what their plan is. And the problem for Republicans today is it's very easy to sloganeer against Obamacare, and it did have a lot of flaws. But now you have the car keys, and now you're in charge, and now you have a person in the White House that's going to sign whatever legislation you want to pass. Republicans could have passed a replacement and proposed and passed a replacement to Obamacare in any number of times in the past any number of years. Even if President Obama hadn't signed it, they would have put their marker down on what exactly they stood for. They failed to do that. Now, the proof is in the pudding. They're going to have to pass something because they promised their constituents they're going to pass something.
I don't think that's as hard as you make it out to be, though.
Let's
because
do it.
Great, and I'm volunteering to help because you can see the flaws. It's like we've already test drove the car, and that's not even that fair because they put their plan out. You see where the flaws are. You can fix them rather quickly. For example, I know a lot of people who would love to have catastrophic care only. People who have families, they're paying these huge premiums,
or they're young and single.
Yeah, or but they go to the doctor. No one takes it anyway. Their deductibles are huge, but they're paying huge premiums, and they're like, what happened to that one? What insurance was supposed to be about in the first place, where you're just insuring for the car crash, for the big event, and it's cheaper, and you've been told by the government that's not good enough. You can't have that. Well, some people want it.
Well, I'll explain why you can't have that. If you like the parts of Obamacare that everybody likes, Republicans and Democrats alike, for specifically the pre-existing conditions part of it, you have to have a mandate. You know who came up with that? The Conservative Heritage Foundation. That's not a liberal theme. And the math doesn't add up. You can't just insure some people with
pre-existing conditions. You have to make people pay for the mandate.
You have to make people pay for the mandate. And the problem is
people that have to have the insurance that were denied before have to pay more for the premium.
So what you're talking about is more like a single payer situation, which, many Democrats like Bernie Sanders said that Obama didn't lean far enough left.
I agree with that. I think the single payer is exactly what we should have had.
We have some breaking news, and I don't know how many people have been keeping up with this, but it means a lot. Are you ready for this?
Are you showing my awesome ring?
So there's been a back and forth with Donald Trump, our president-elect, and members of the GOP because they wanted to wipe away an independent committee that looks at ethics within their own party, Republicans, and hand it over to a bipartisan, less sort of transparent unit, if you will. What that means is the DTS, drain the swamp, becomes much more complicated. Well, seconds ago, we learned that they've now pulled that measure that would do that. Maybe a tweet from the president-elect might have nudged them. But now they're holding an emergency meeting to talk about actually not doing that, taking back the helm of looking into their own ethics, Republicans, and not handing it over to someone else. Now, we know that President-elect Donald Trump has been tweeting about this. Oh, you're grinning. Why?
Oh, I just think it's President-elect Donald Trump. He's not in office yet. But he's already, I don't think a lot of people do. I think you look at the stock market and the way things have gone, but his influence now on what is transpiring, and remember, he did something so unprecedented in the history of politics. He not only defeated the Democratic Party, but he didn't have a whole lot of support from the Republican Party on the other side.
Paul Ryan went back and forth.
Yeah, so we have a president-elect that is taking over the country and will have to work with both sides of the aisle. Normally, you have one side that sort of agrees with what you're doing. What he is doing right now, I think, is so wonderful. He is, first of all, living up to the promises that he's made. He's gone out and tried to do some of the things even before he's in office. And people are excited about that. But the other part of it is he is doing something where he is saying, look, there are certain things that aren't going to be acceptable. Now, in the political world, they're acceptable. Let's police our own. Let's try this. Let's pick up bipartisan. But he says that's not going to work that way. This is not going to be like any presidency we have. The policies and problems that have been built up over years.
Sounds to me like you're happy with what you're seeing, Joe.
I am happy with what I'm seeing. I like seeing the tree being shaken. I like to see the apples fall.
I would add this, though. From what I was reading, most of the people who wanted this in the House were dealt with investigations in their past.
Right.
So the Office of Congressional Ethics was probably not one of their favorite venues to go before. So wiping it away and giving that power to somebody else might have looked delicious to them. Here's what Donald Trump tweeted. So let's look, the president-elect. Just a few minutes ago, with all that Congress, if we can roll this up, has to work on, do they really have to make the weakening of the independent ethics watchdog as unfair as it is? And previous to that, maybe their number one act and priority, focus on tax reform, healthcare, and so many other things of far greater importance. Hashtag DTS drain the swamp. All right, so that was from earlier today. So clearly he got in on the game. Kevin McCarthy had said this about Obamacare, but I wonder if he'd say this about this ethics conversation too. His got in on the game. Kevin McCarthy had said this about Obamacare, but I wonder if he'd say this about this ethics conversation too. His tweets matter, and they can change the game.
I didn't think the way the whole ethics panel breaks down, all of it felt like it didn't quite get you there. I mean, it all seemed like the hen guarding the fox guarding the hen house. I mean, there's no doubt that we need some kind of ethical oversight in D.C., but to me, none of these options seem clean, and I would like them to focus on the tax code. Not that this doesn't need to be done. Julie, what kind of reform to you makes sense?
Well, the Congressional Ethics Office, if you remember, was actually set up in the wake of Jack Abramoff.
2008.
Right, and all of the conflicts there, and they have done some very good work on both sides of the aisle. To me, the House cannot police its own.
Yeah.
I mean, you can't ask.
I agree.
You can't any more than any of us can really police each other, because we're colleagues. We like each other. We have to work with each other. It's hard to do. You need an outsider to do it. And so I have to listen. I don't compliment Donald Trump a lot, but I will today. I think what he did was incredibly effective, because when you have people like Paul Ryan and Kevin McCarthy, who've been in the swamp of D.C. for a very long time, who supposedly did not agree with this abolishment of the Congressional Ethics Office, but nevertheless went along with it. And then you have Donald Trump coming in and saying, whoa, you know what? What are you doing? And he was right to do that. Good for him.
Whoa. So, by the way,
Julie,
one of the things you would lose if you got rid of the OCE is the fact that whenever they would come up with evidence against a member, they would disseminate that. Well, then you wouldn't be getting that information, not only the American people, but other lawmakers on Congress.
I think this highlights two things. I think it highlights the ambitious agenda that we are seeing as we do see this transfer. And two, I think it continues to show, as you're pointing out, Joe, Donald Trump is showing all those Americans that backed him, supported him all the way, voted for him. It shows them, I've still got your back. I'm not going to just fall in line with whatever is expected here in Washington. I'm going to be the man you put in office to stand up for you.
He stays away from the political rhetoric. President-elect Trump is always going to be President-elect Trump. He will say things that we're going to step back and go, whoa. But then he's also going to have an impact on what's going on, and it opens people's eyes. Yeah. Take this into consideration. Take that into consideration. It's what happened with Ford today. A very interesting situation.
Very interesting, yeah.
So all of a sudden now they're not going to build cars in Mexico. They're going to build them up
online,
up online on Detroit, which means more jobs,
700
which means opportunities.
Yep.
And if people say, oh, it's only 700 jobs. It's 700 that weren't in this country.
Yeah,
and
you have to start somewhere. That among the families that may be attached to those now working members within those households potentially. Sure. Very interesting. So I just want to kind of put a fine point on this, because I think people will hear us talking about ethics and wonder, why is that such a big deal? The fact that people don't want you to know what they're doing on Capitol Hill, and they happen to be in your own party, that's what Donald Trump stood up to today.
There's one more thing that I think is very interesting. Shortly before he put out his tweet, Kellyanne Conway put out a tweet siding with the Republicans who tried to abolish this office, and then Trump came out and a few minutes later said no. What's unclear to me about what Trump did, though, is whether he opposes the abolishing of the office or just abolishes the timing of the office, the timing of the act to abolish the office. Now
that time will tell.
Right, time will tell that. But I hope that it's the former. I hope he really understands how important it is to reestablish confidence that the American public needs to have on both sides of the aisle in what goes on the Hill. This office is crucial. And if people understood and had worked on the Hill and understood exactly how toxic the environment there is, where one hand washes the other,
they can imagine.
I think they can imagine how important this office is. They'd understand why abolishing it is absolutely the wrong.
I mean, the office finds something on somebody and it can get to the end of it and it can make that public. Without that office, would we know much of what we know about members on the Hill? All right, we'll move on. President Obama's closest advisor claims more than the last or over the past 8 years, her boss has not had any scandals. But what about Benghazi, the IRS targeting of conservative groups, and the payment to Iran for American hostages? Well, we'll get into it. And after the show, when the TV version of us goes to sleep, we wake up live online. FoxNews.com/outnumbered. Tap the Overtime tab, or you can go to Facebook, and we'll pop up there, Facebook Live. Our handle is Outnumbered FNC. And tweet us anytime you want. I think even Joe will tweet. Will you tweet? Look at you with your phone out. We'll be right back.
Absolutely.
New claims from President Obama's closest advisor that her boss hasn't had any scandals over the last 8 years. Here's Valerie Jarrett.
The president prides himself on the fact that his administration hasn't had a scandal and that he hasn't done anything to embarrass himself. But that's not because he's being someone other than who he is. That's because that's who he is. That's who.
Like Operation Fast and Furious, Benghazi, the IRS targeting of conservative groups. There's also the Justice Department seizing journalist records, the NSA's mass surveillance program, those alleged ransom payments for hostages held in Iran. Who could forget Bo Bergdahl? The swap there, multiple issues with the Secret Service. And, of course, there was Hillary Clinton's private server. Joe, what do you think about this?
I just think that it's, once again, President Obama has always looked at the world a certain way, but I don't think he has looked at it in a realistic way, somewhat of a dream world. And to think that there hasn't been some type of quote-unquote scandals that have occurred under his watch, you just went through the litany of them, and that's not all of them. There are so many things that have occurred and happened under his watch, and they're basically going to say that there weren't any scandals. Well, what would you call them?
Maybe, Julie, is the stack smaller than the stacks at other administrations?
What you listed right now, and I'm going to take the email scandal out of it because that's really more Hillary Clinton than him, but if you're going to, with the stuff that you listed, Bo Bergdahl, the ransom payments, those are policy differences that people may have. I'm not sure there were scandals. I mean, those were things
when he stood in the Rose Garden with Bo Bergdahl and his parents and said that he was a hero and they're not going to leave him there and they're going to bring him back.
Well, trying to get the information on it at a Fast and Furious, too, is another
Well, wait a second, but you're actually confusing the fact that the President of the United States and the Commander-in-Chief said, I'm not going to leave an American soldier regardless of what he did on the battlefield versus leaving him to the Taliban's devices versus that may not be something you agree with or maybe not something I agree with, but it's not necessarily something that's a scandal. It's something that brings out a lot of passion in people. To me, a scandal is when somebody trades on their name for money. To me, a scandal is somebody that appoints U.S. attorneys that might only want to do something that the president wants them to do and goes after people politically. I mean, that's a scandal to me.
That sounds like the IRS scandal.
Scandal to me is not Bo Bergdahl, for example.
But why do we have to even talk about individual scandals? I mean, if you look at what Valerie Jarrett said, she said not only hasn't he had a scandal, he hasn't done anything to embarrass himself. And I'm reminded right away of him referencing ISIS as the JV team, only to see it grow and grow and grow.
I agree. He embarrassed himself with that. I think he embarrassed himself.
But how are they defining the term scandal? That's really what it boils down to. I mean, is it a lack of judgment? Is it a misinformation? How do you qualify it?
What about the IRS targeting conservative groups here?
Yeah,
to me that seems like a straight up
I think
scandal.
that would check like every box in terms of a scandal. You've got Americans being targeted by an American institution overseen by an American government. I mean, and the president knows about it. The president can act. I mean, I think that is the definition of a scandal. I think the Veterans Affairs Administration was a scandal.
Left that out. That's a good one.
And how many of our veterans who served were taken advantage of and left on those long hospital lists to die, and the president knew about this.
And what's being done now?
Where was the accountability for it?
What's being done now?
And now? And Julie, every time somebody jumps the White House fence, I wish you'd stand up and scream scandal. Because if something had happened to the man in the White House, we'd be screaming scandal. Why wasn't he protected? Look, did he hold those people who let him down accountable? If he didn't, and it doesn't look like he did the way that we would expect him to, that's a scandal.
Doesn't he have to take some responsibility for the Hillary Clinton email scandal? I mean, that was something that happened on his watch to his Secretary of State, somebody that was, reporting directly to him. They had said you can't be Secretary of State too unless you distance yourself from the foundation. So many emails were related to that and that relationship. I mean, that was a lot of scandal that he had a hand in. I don't think he's clean in that.
I don't know that he had a hand in it. The
rules that she broke.
The question is
sending emails to that server himself.
The question, well, first of all, I think when the President of the State sends an email to somebody, I'm not sure that he knows what the server is or where anything is. So I'll leave it at that. But let's be very careful here because we have a new administration coming in. And I just want to be very clear that if we're talking about things like Bo Bergdahl is a scandal, the Iranian deal is a scandal, which again is a policy difference, but I'm not sure is a scandal, that we address.
What word would you choose for it, by the way?
I would address it. I would use controversial. I would not say it's a scandal. A scandal to me is huge.
I say it's more than controversial.
No, it's not controversial.
The Iranian deal is more than controversial.
On the VA, I agree with you.
And on the IRS.
Yes, on the VA, I absolutely agree with you.
So how does she get away with saying that?
I'm not suggesting that she's right, but I'm saying the lists that we came up with, to me, there's a differentiation between a controversial policy. And by the way, what Bo Bergdahl did is awful and put a lot of people in danger and is maybe potentially responsible for the lives of people being
But he's still
killed.
an American, is what
But
you're
he's an
saying.
American, and to me, it's not. What the scandal would be to leave an American on the battlefield.
But that's only one of
Okay,
the
we gotta go.
list of things.
We gotta talk about
Murder rate in his own hometown of Chicago is a scandal.
In the break on this one, that's a good one. All right,
We'll move on.
Meantime, a record year in Chicago, as Harris was mentioning, for all the wrong reasons. The city seeing its most homicides in decades. Now the message President-elect Trump has for Chicago's Democratic mayor and just what can be done about the violence.
To the House floor we go on Capitol Hill right now, and a big point for us to stop and pause and look at what's happening on the floor. They are about to take the vote on the next House Speaker. Of course, we fully anticipate it will be Paul Ryan, expected to win this, but it is a bit of tradition to watch this together, and so we thought we'd step in on the floor before they start the vote for House Speaker and let you know that this continues the 115th Congress as it convenes and opens for the first time today, this hour.
Chicago's soaring violence reaching a grim new milestone and grabbing the attention of the incoming president. The nation's third biggest city experiencing its bloodiest year in nearly 2 decades in 2016, averaging more than 2 killings a day and far surpassing other major American cities over the past 12 months. Chicago recording 762 homicides. That's more than New York and Los Angeles combined, which are far bigger cities, by the way. President-elect Donald Trump going off about this on Twitter as he takes a jab at Chicago's Democratic Mayor Rahm Emanuel. Mr. Trump tweeting, quote, "Chicago murder rate is record-setting. 4,331 shooting victims with 762 murders in 2016. If mayor can't do it, he must ask for federal help." This is a huge problem, Joe. I'm born and raised in the city of Chicago. This news is just disturbing, and it's getting worse.
And in 2017, I believe there have already been 4 deaths and 35 shootings. So it's not stopping. But why hasn't something been done sooner? Why hasn't someone stepped in?
Well, a lot of people look to President Obama. Why he hasn't?
Why haven't? Rahm Emanuel was part of his entourage. I mean, he was part of the
Chief of Staff.
Right, he was chief of staff. So why wouldn't you go there and try and help? I think if it requires the federal government to do something, President-elect Trump will do that. But something has to be done. You just can't continue to allow this type of activity to continue in a city like Chicago or any city in the United States.
And while they try to figure out what to do, whether it's at the local or federal level, they're looking for blame. And one of the former superintendents, fired in 2015, as you'll remember, one of the former superintendents of the Chicago Police Department, he's looking for blame. He's actually blaming Black Lives Matter. Listen.
What's happening is, and this is ironic, that a movement with the goal of saving black lives, at this point, is getting black lives taken. Because 80% of our murder victims here in Chicago are male blacks. Less than half of 1% of all the shootings in this city involve police officers shooting civilians. And the political environment that exists in this city and across this country is contributing to a sense of lawlessness.
Gary McCarthy, and he's blaming the BLM movement, Julie, on creating a political atmosphere of anti-police sentiment.
It may be. I mean, he got pushed out largely because of that police sentiment. If you remember, there was an awful shooting in Chicago, and as a result, he got, I believe Gary McCarthy got thrown under the bus by Rahm Emanuel, and I said that on the couch back when it first happened. Look, there is no excuse whatsoever for what goes on in Chicago. When you look at the city of New York and the city of Los Angeles, cities with larger populations, both in Chicago, having a combined murder rate, gun violence rate that is lower than Chicago's. The problem lies with Chicago. And Rahm Emanuel is the mayor of Chicago, and ultimately the buck stops with him. And I think this should not be a Democratic or Republican issue, and people shouldn't defend his behavior. Furthermore, my understanding is he did go and meet with the president-elect and did ask for help from the president-elect, so I would think the president-elect would know that before tweeting what he tweeted. But nevertheless, there is a role for Washington to play. There is a role for the administration to play. And I hope they do get together and play.
And this is the same mayor, which, by the way, very recently, Melissa, said, you are safe here in this sanctuary city. It's important to point out that this is a mayor who's really not acknowledging the problems that city has.
No, the solution is, but to be fair, I don't think a lot of people do. I'm not sure if federal help is the right help. It strikes me as a situation when you see numbers like that have escalated so far beyond comparable cities. It feels like it is a neighborhood or a city that's become unpoliceable. There is a big systemic problem that needs to be attacked from the outside. Whatever it is, they need more help. They need big change, and it's systemic. There's something very wrong.
But you have to look to leadership.
Yes, without question.
I mean, you can't get away from leadership in a situation like this. Put a group together. Put some groups together. Do what you need to do. Yeah. The police need to be backed in these situations.
May I just say something about this real quickly? I was living in the Bronx in the 1980s when the Bronx was burning, and people thought that was unpoliceable, and people thought that was absolutely the worst place on earth to live. And ultimately, New York City not only became policeable, but I think the safest, largest city in the country. So with the right policies and the right leadership, and you're so right, it is policeable, it is doable. I just wish they would do that in Chicago, because mothers are losing their sons and daughters over this.
It needs to be a priority. All right, we are awaiting an announcement from President-elect Trump about the Russian hacking of the election. He says he knows something the American people don't know, what that could be and what it could mean for our relationship with Russia. All right, we continue to wait an announcement from President-elect Donald Trump on what he knows about the Russian election hacking that the American people don't know. On New Year's Eve, Mr. Trump said he would reveal that information today or tomorrow. His team has said we can't jump to conclusions about the hacking until the intelligence report is finalized. Meantime, WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange spoke exclusively with Hannity.
Can you say to the American people unequivocally that you did not get this information about the DNC, John Podesta's emails? Can you tell the American people 1,000% you did not get it from Russia or anybody associated with Russia?
We can say, we have said repeatedly over the last 2 months that our source is not the Russian government, and it is.
And telling Fox earlier that what Assange said there does not rule out that Russia engaged in election hacking. He could be saying the information WikiLeaks obtained was not delivered by the Russian government, and the intelligence community believes all signs do point to Russia. Julie, to you first.
I mean, look, Julian Assange, first of all, I don't know when he became a member of polite society, but you don't have to hand Julian Assange a packet from Vladimir Putin to prove that it came from the Russian government. The Russian government could hand it to person X, who could hand it to Julian Assange, and whether Julian Assange knows where the origination came from is irrelevant. I mean, every intelligence agency in the country said it came from the Russians. We now apparently have computer markings that said that it came from the Russians. Both sides of the aisle in Washington agree it came from the Russians. Only 2 people believe it may not have come from the Russians: Donald Trump and Julian Assange. And I suggest that Donald Trump get his head out of the sand.
But that's to where, Joe, I think you said it leading into the commercial break, or in the commercial, you said he is the master at teases, which is a phrase we use in TV to keep people tuned in. And we are tuned in because he says he knows something the American people do not. What does he know?
Well, you notice what he says. He knows something. It's not like I will inform you of something. President-elect Trump speaks in very specific terms. He makes very specific statements. He will enlighten the American people at some point in time. But as he has done with the media, he sort of sets his own agenda. He decides he's going to go play golf. He's not going to let the media know. If he wants to do something, he will let us know in time. And he has been privy to the meetings with the intelligence community to be able to try and understand what's going on when it comes to the hacking. It isn't just the Russians we're concerned with when it comes to hacking. The Chinese come up all the time. This just happened to involve, quote unquote, the election. And so what we're trying to do is, I think what he's going to try and do is put it behind him, because you do have to have relations around the world with the Chinese, with the Russians, with everybody else.
So my question has to do with this. How is it possible, or why would it be that President-elect Donald Trump would defy all of those 17 agencies within the government that say that this was Russia. I mean, is there some political expediency that maybe we don't see? Because if it was them and he's making excuses or somehow stepping into the gap between the country's national security and Russia, that's a problem if we don't know why.
Well, that's what we're waiting to find out. I mean, does he disagree with everybody? Maybe he'll try. The way I look at it is you just have to wait to hear what is said instead of trying to
Well, how long do we
look
need
at
to
it
wait?
and say,
I'll tell you how.
we'll wait 2 or 3 days. I don't think he's going to wait very long.
I feel like we're getting lost in the weeds of what's really important here is how dangerous hacking is. I mean, how many companies and governments and national security have been compromised across the board. And we're spending so much time talking about who, you know, was this Putin? Was it someone in Russia? It's very bad people no matter what on every side. And I almost think Americans don't take it seriously enough. I mean, the kind of damage that could be done hacking into a nuclear plant. And this is just like a huge problem. We're kind of focusing on the wrong
Or the energy that we found that they had hacked.
But it's hard to track because so many of those hackers are on the black market.
But they are. You're right. But he also said, don't trust the computers. Don't trust this type of communication. If you want to communicate with somebody, write it down.
You know how they tracked Osama bin Laden? Through a courier. The president-elect might want to consider that. How safe that is also.
You eat the piece of paper that's handed to you. I'm just saying.
Well, also, we should take a look at Donald Trump's tax returns to answer the question about what we know about Russia.
I think all paper's edible. It's just not tasty.
It doesn't taste
all right. Well, for more on this, you want to be sure to tune in to Hannity tonight. You can catch his entire exclusive interview with Julian Assange in London. That's this evening at 10 p.m. Eastern time right here on Fox News Channel. Well, the 49ers giving QB Colin Kaepernick a prestigious award for courage and inspiration. That's drawing big criticism after Kaepernick's refusal to stand during the national anthem.